about those too. One way to define divorce is that for one or both members of the pair, at some point in time, the things about you that had to be tolerated started outweighing the things about you that were valued and needed and not available. A couple of presidents back, we had a fine example of the competence-deviance hypothesis. If this is zero and this is, and over here is competence and over here is deviance, there isn't enough room in this room to describe Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon had phenomenal competence in many different areas. There's no question when you look at his pattern of activities that in a number of areas he was a phenomenally competent man. And there's no question that he also had many severe deviances. No question to some of us. But one day, after a long, long time, the American people said, there just isn't enough foreign diplomacy competence to outweigh all of that domestic deviance. Get out. You just dropped below zero. Then came a president who hovered so closely around zero that it was very difficult to make a decision. Very little in the way of competence, very little in the way of deviance, and he sat right there. Now, did I say something bad about Gerald Ford? Or did I say something bad or good about Richard Nixon? That's the interesting thing. I haven't said anything bad about anybody. Because it isn't how far out there you are, or how far out there you are, or how close or how close. It's the relationship between the two. So when we talk about severely handicapped people, for instance, isn't it interesting that for those people that have things about them that bring a great deal of negative attention, if we simply reconceptualized them and said, we just need something that brings at least that much positive attention, that those people would be just like you and me in terms of making it or not making it. Now, to talk about that a little further, we need to look at this concept of deviance a little more. I think there are three kinds, and you'll find them listed in the definitions. The first kind of deviance is what I call public elected deviance. And public elected deviance, sometimes I call that developmental deviance, because as we get older, it develops out. You know, your mother says to you, don't eat your soup with a fork. You know, or don't do that. You know, what are the neighbors going to think? What are people going to think? And so as you get older, you find, certain things, even though they're kind of fun, I don't think I'll do those anymore because they just cost too much. And then there are other things where you say to yourself, no, I'm going to do that. And if people can't deal with that, then that's too bad. As you begin to see yourself as having competencies, you become a little freer about not giving up some of those things that, maybe they bring negative attention, but I'm going to keep them anyway. It's elected. You can choose. I'll keep them or I won't keep them. And that's public elected deviance. The second category of deviance is what I call private deviance. And private deviance is really wonderful. Those are things that people do, everyone does. Everyone has private deviance. Those are things that you do that you really like doing, and God forbid anyone should know. I used to give examples, okay, but people flush real easy. It turned out to be a beautiful diagnostic instrument. I would say, for example, and then there'd be a red one over here and a red one over here. So I don't even give examples anymore. But you think you can take the gold self-administered test of private deviance and just say, what are some things that you do that you really like doing? But oh my goodness, if anybody knew, it would be just terrible. Now, some people say, is he talking about sex stuff? Well, that certainly could be a category in there. But there are lots of things that have nothing to do with that at all. I'll give you one innocuous one. I'll give you one of mine, okay? And it's some of yours too. If anybody flushes on this one, it's your own fault, okay? Now you're waiting, aren't you? Okay. Sometimes I like to go into the kitchen and get out the Skippy crunchy peanut butter and take an enormous, gigantic spoon load and just sit there and gorge myself on it. All right? But I don't do that when company's over, you know, or when anybody's around. I got caught once by my daughter, so I'm in trouble anyway, you know. But that's a nice, simple, easy one, okay? I've got to be very careful talking about private deviance. Do you know, there's a couple interesting things about private deviance. First of all, one of the things that makes it so nice is it's free. You don't have to come up with a competence to balance for it unless you get caught. It's also nice that some of the niceness about it is the fact that it's secret. That I'm doing this because it's so nice and I'm comfortable with it, but I know no one else would be, you say to yourself. The other interesting thing, when do the severely handicapped ever have a chance for private deviance? Never. They don't have a chance for private anything. You know what I'll bet you happens? Let's say that we considered, and remember I've already said that deviance and competence too, those are all relative things. Those are all things that depend on the circumstance. But let's say, for example, that there was a place or whatever where people considered masturbation to be deviant. All right? It brought negative attention. All right? And some people, it was private deviance, and so it didn't bring anybody because nobody knew. You know what I'll bet happens if we use that as an example? I'll bet that there are severely handicapped people that are fired from jobs or put back in institutions or taken out of programs for masturbating where people can see them, and that the very people that made the decisions to do that masturbate too. That there are people that create major disturbances in other people's lives for doing exactly the same thing that they do, but they know where and when. Now that's kind of interesting. It's real. I can say it's sad. I can say it's wrong. I also have to say it's real. That's the way our society works. Our society even says sometimes, okay, do what you want to do, but don't let anybody know, and it's fine. But we even say stuff like that. And then we don't come up with the powerful training procedures to teach severely handicapped people the rules that you and I operate under, and we think something's wrong with them. It's not them at all. It's us. The third kind of deviance is what I call public non-elected deviance. And public non-elected deviance is the closest thing that I can think of to defining the difference between them and us. Public non-elected deviance, that's stuff that brings negative attention that you can't elect to do or not do, and it's public. People can see it. So someone who doesn't talk the way other people talk, or walk the way other people walk, or look the way other people look, or think the way other people think. Those are examples of public non-elected deviance. Now being non-elected and being public doesn't mean that it can't change. For example, There's a guy in Los Angeles named Robert Shushan, S-H-U-S-H-A-N, who has done some fantastic work changing the appearance of people who don't look very good in the eyes of most people. He has taken, for instance, people with Down syndrome, mongoloid persons, and he's let their hair grow out instead of the old mongoloid bowl haircut, the convenient one that says let them all look alike and ugly because it's a lot easier in the morning. And he's let their hair grow out. You know, if you look at some of the people around here, there are a lot of you people here, men, whose hair covers your ears. Well, if you have little tiny ears and they're way down low, that's not a bad thing to cover. Those people, those Down syndrome people have epicanthal folds, don't they? Boy, that sure is a giveaway. Not if you're wearing a pair of glasses that have shaded tops, and a lot of normal people wear glasses with shaded tops. And if you have a mustache, and you wear a turtleneck sweater when the weather's appropriate for it and things, you know something? I could distribute a number of Down syndrome persons throughout this room with nothing more than a little simple, totally inexpensive cosmetics. And all of you hypersensitive people who of course know those people, you know, they'd sit next to you for half of this conference before you realized who they were. They've taken people, for instance, a woman that has an appearance that brings a great deal of negative attention. She has a great big hook nose, and she has two teeth, one over here and one over here, and they're very long and no other teeth. And long black hair. She looks like a witch. Exactly like a witch. You know what they did? They cut her hair back to shoulder length. They taught her how to use a little makeup on the over here on the sides of her nose that it just pulls the nose down. I've thought of using it, but I rub my face too much. They taught her to smile without opening her lips, so that when she smiles, it's like this instead of a real smile like this, which exposes a great deal of negative attention. Without seeing the slides, you're going to have to take my word for it. I don't have the slides. Before they did anything with her, she was a very, very unattractive person to look at. Nice person, but very unattractive. With nothing more than a few little odds and ends changes, she is a genuinely attractive person to look at. Genuinely so. I don't mean that you'd look and say, hey, not bad for a severely retarded lady. No. I mean that if she was walking down the street and any of us were walking past her and conscious of her walking, not of who she was, but just conscious of a person walking, we'd say, what an attractive woman. Period. Period. Not considering that. There would be no considering because you can't see it. Now there's other ways to do something about public elected deviance. You can teach people to walk differently. You can teach people to think differently. And when you get down and start looking at it, isn't it interesting? There are two forms of public non-elected deviance. There are things that bring negative attention. If we talk about behavior now, not about appearance, but about behavior. There are behaviors that bring negative attention because of their presence. A person talks very strangely. A person hits other people. A person is always moving around very rapidly and never sits in one place. Those things bring negative behavior because a person has them. Then there's a whole range of behaviors, maybe most of the things you teach. There are behaviors that bring negative attention because of their absence. That's a really interesting distinction. He doesn't know how to use a public transportation system in a place where you're expected to. He doesn't go to the bathroom in the toilet and you're expected to. He doesn't answer questions and you're expected to. He doesn't know how to work and you're expected to. He doesn't know how to make breakfast, doesn't know how to get dressed, doesn't know how to comb his hair. All of those things bring negative attention because of their absence, not because of their presence. And if that isn't complicated, then this is. When you teach somebody one of those behaviors, you have created a nothing. If a person is experiencing, let me change that around. If there are some behaviors that a person doesn't have and those bring negative attention, when you give him those behaviors, all you do is bring him to zero. If a person walks in here like a lot of you did today and your hair is combed, you're wearing clothes, you're sitting quietly, who said great? Who said to you, you brushed your hair this morning? Terrific. Okay? You're not naked. Right on. You know? I call those zero-order behaviors. And a zero-order behavior, it's in there, a zero-order behavior is a behavior that if you don't have it, it brings negative attention, and if you do have it, it brings nothing. You'll see when we come back to some other stuff later in the conference just how important that is. It's very, very important. If you teach all of the zero-order behaviors in the world, remember, a guy's still at zero. The first time he does something wrong, he's out. In fact, let me show you how silly. Let me tell you a story. I'll give you two different versions to this story so you can get a feeling of what this means. Let's say that you work in a work activity center or a sheltered workshop, and you have a 35-year-old gentleman who has been labeled severely retarded, and you have really succeeded. Success in our business right now is bringing somebody to zero. Let's say if we're talking about work behavior, the people come in and they don't know how to do anything and they're very poorly adjusted. And so if you're successful, you make them very well adjusted at doing nothing. And if you're even more successful than that, you'll even go find them a place to do it. And so your placement officer goes out and lo and behold gets this person a job in a factory pushing a broom, sweeping. Isn't that wonderful? He's actually making a living. And you're successful because he pushes okay, and he doesn't say a lot of things to the people when he walks by, and he lifts his feet instead of having the retardate shuffle. He doesn't stare funny at the girls. At lunchtime, he sits there very nicely and eats quietly, and if somebody says something, he says something back. Really nice. And he shoves the broom. So you put him in this factory, and after a couple of weeks, a couple of people over there in aisle 10, assemblers on the bench, they go up to the foreman and they talk to him. And then the foreman goes to the personnel man and he says, sir, we have a little problem. You know that guy that you hired a couple of weeks ago to sweep for us? You know, I feel so good about the way that has worked out. People have been real nice to him, and things have gone very, very nicely. There's a problem, though. You know, he sweeps real fine, and everything is fine, but I had a couple of people come up today, and they said, every time he goes past their bench, He picks his nose and he wipes it on their bench. And they don't even want to work anymore. They say it's really, like at first they thought, maybe once in a while or something, but it's really bad, Ugh. So the personnel man says, I'll take care of it. So he thinks about it, and he makes a decision. He fires the guy. Why did he fire him? It's very simple. The well-being and the peace of mind and the esprit de corps of the labor force is very important in a factory. And we tried, we really tried. And I guess we're just going to, we just don't have any other choice. We'll just have to dismiss him. But we sure did try. But we can't do this, Well, that's one explanation. You know what the other explanation is? Who needs him? He's at zero, folks. You need the place swept, go down to manpower and get a guy out to sweep. What are you going to have to do? Train him? Anybody can sweep. And if the place doesn't get swept for a while, what does that do to the accounts receivable? Nothing. What does it do to the stability of the factory? Nothing. And so here's a guy at zero. He's okay. He's at zero. But the first time something happened that can be called deviance, he's below zero. Because when you take anything minus from zero, it's minus. And so he's out. That's what the people are really saying. Who needs him? Now let's tell the story again. This version I tried to get published in Cosmopolitan, and they just wouldn't buy it. This is the same story, but it starts 6 months earlier. And in that factory, there's a man, he's 64 and a half years old, hard worker. He operates a machine in that factory that's extremely important. It's a hard machine to operate, too. It takes a normal operator at least a month of training to be able to operate that machine. And that machine must operate or the factory doesn't operate. Now that's a reality. There are a lot of machines like that out there. When a machine breaks down, the factory stops. And here's this guy, Herman. And Herman knows that he lives in a society that in 6 months, when he's 65, the society is going to say to him, up until now you've been perfect, and from now on you're zero, out, get out, goodbye. What kind of a society that says a date is the definition of competence and deviance? So, the factory is important to him. So he goes to the foreman and he says, hey, in 6 months you guys are going to throw me out of here. You better get somebody in here for me to teach this machine, All right, Herman, we'll take care of it. It's all right, we'll take care of it. And this is bothering Herman because, that machine means something. He's been on it for 25 years, And one night he's home having dinner, and his daughter and son-in-law are over to dinner. And his son-in-law just happens to be the placement officer from the sheltered workshop. And he's talking about this problem, and the son-in-law's clicking, And he says, hey, Pop, let me ask you a question, Would it hurt your self-concept any if I suggested replacing you with a severely retarded man? And Herman says, hey, he says, I'm 64 and a half years old. He says, at this time in my life, if you think you can hurt my self-concept, try. What do you mean? Tell me about it. So he tells them. They talk about it. And they start. Every night at 7 o'clock, 3 men walk into that factory and they work. An hour and a half, 2 hours, and they go home. Every night they're working. The 6 months passes. Comes a lunchtime, and everybody gathers around, and the man in the gray suit comes out, and he says, ladies and gentlemen, we're here today to honor. Isn't that interesting, to honor like this, okay? We're going to honor Herman today for the wonderful service he's given us. Herman, come over here, Herman. We're so proud of you that we're going to fire you and everything. In fact, Herman, I'd like, here you go. We'd like to give this to you so that you can go somewhere and sit down and look at it go round and round and round. Okay? Bye-bye. And then all of a sudden things get real quiet, and the foreman says, hey, wait a minute, the machine. I forgot. And the president looks around and says, well, wait a minute, you mean there's nobody to operate the machine? And as Herman waits a second, timing is very important. And he says, no problem. I've taken care of that. He says, hey, Fred. And people look over, and here's this guy. Kind of strange looking guy, Doesn't make eye contact very well, kind of looks around. He says, Fred, come on, Fred. And what's this? Strange. Walks a little strangely. Walks over to the machine and sits down, and the machine comes alive. And the people look and they say, far out. Wow, the machine, because they were sitting there thinking, a month home with no bread? Uh-oh. Herman says, bye. Takes his watch and goes. His son-in-law stands way back over in a corner with his fingers crossed, watching. And the factory goes back to work. 2 weeks go by. Same 2 weeks as in the first story. A couple of people walk up to the foreman, the same people. The foreman goes to the personnel man. The personnel man thinks about it. The personnel man calls in the custodian and he says, sir, he says, I'm very sorry to bother you. But he says, I have really no alternative. He says, from now on, at least 2 or 3 times a week, go over to the machine over there on aisle 10 and clean all the boogers off of it. You just sit there and laugh, folks. How many of your people have gotten thrown off of jobs for nothing more than that because who needed them? And at the same time, you tell me any person in a business in his right mind that would close down a factory for 30 days because someone picked their nose. No one in their right mind. Do you see what competence means? Do you see that deviance is relative? That it really doesn't matter what you do that brings negative attention? It matters how it relates to what you do that's wanted and needed and not available somewhere else. So we've missed the boat. We have been so worried about those people not having all of those things that people don't like that we have failed to realize that it doesn't matter. The balance matters. Now, if we have a person that's not toilet trained, the idea of that person working in a factory in diapers is pretty far out. I don't think very many people would hire anybody in diapers. No. I'm not suggesting to you that we should ignore deviance. I'm not suggesting to you that we should act in a way that says, don't worry, we'll just build competence. What I'm saying is whatever time we're spending now trying to eliminate deviance, we had better start spending at least as much time building competence, giving them things that are wanted and needed and not available in anybody. Okay. The last little look that I'd like to take at the insides of your mind and what happens in there that causes us so many problems is I'd like to point out to you that you have a card system back there, and that card system is causing problems. What card do you suppose pops up when you see somebody walk in this conference with a cane with a red tip on the end of it, and they're moving their hand like this? Or you walk into a course somewhere at the university and someone raises his hand to speak and blocks. I kick it like that. Or when you walk in somewhere and here's somebody sitting at a typewriter and working, and they're in a wheelchair. You know what happens? Or you see a guy like Ed Roberts, as totally physically handicapped as he is, when you walk into his office, it's pretty obvious that he directs a very, very large organization. There's a card back up in there that says, I am looking at an intact system with one or more malfunctioning subsystems. You didn't know you had that card, did you? Some of you, your card reads a little more simply. It says, he's just like me, but his eyes don't work. He's just like me, but his legs don't work. He's just like me, but he can't hear. But there's a card that pops up in there that basically says, he's an intact system. There is a subsystem that's out of whack. That's a nice card. Keep that card. You've got another card. That's the one I'm really after. When you walk into an institution and there's somebody sitting there going like this. When you walk into a workshop and here's a guy that's as tall as you and as handsome as you, and he says, good morning, hello, I like your shirt. You know, a different card pops up. A card pops up that says, this is a malfunctioning system. For those of you that have the other wording, it says, this one's not like me. You know what that card does to you? Remember now, you live in a society that has a nice set of rules about those things. This society says if you have an intact system with a malfunctioning system, fix it. If you have a malfunctioning system, junk it. Let's use the automobile as a perfect example. Okay, you pull in the driveway, you go in the house, you go to sleep. You wake up the next morning, you come out, you put your key in the car, you turn it, and nothing happens. What? You're kidding. You try it again, right? Okay, nothing. So you call the gas station, the guy comes out, picks up the hood, takes his little instruments, does a little fooling around, and he says to you, first of all, your battery is dead. And you say to him, I didn't need to call you to know that. Yeah, but a cell is bad. Also, your alternator is not working. And while it has nothing to do with this problem, I noticed that the air is showing through in your tires. And so what do? You say to yourself, this is a perfectly intact system. I drove it in here last night. Fix it. That's it, of course. That's car number one. Car number two. You don't see him much here in Wisconsin. You see him in Kentucky and North Carolina, Tennessee. Sits out in front of the house. Okay? No wheels. No windows. The hood is nowhere to be found. The carburetor is nowhere to be found. The seats are all ripped out. Can you imagine now a guy, you're walking out in front of the house and you look at the car and he says to you, do you know that the transmission in that car is perfect? That car had a tune-up just 6,000 miles ago. That car has the best 8-track of any car I've ever owned. Who cares? Whoever, except for the junk man, whoever looks at intact subsystems that belong to a malfunctioning system, nobody bothers, nobody cares. Not in this society they don't. Junk it. Easy decision. Now the third car. I call it the borderline car. We've all had them. Some of you have them right. Some of you drove them today. Okay? Needs rings and valves. Needs a set of tires. Needs a new alternator. Needs upholstery. And the radio needs fixing. You know what? There's only one problem with the car. Deciding if it's a malfunctioning system or an intact system with malfunctioning subsystems. That's your only problem, folks. Because once that decision is made, it's all easy. You say to yourself, junk it. Don't pour good money after bad. What's the sense of doing this? That's going to happen. You know, you come up with all the reasons after it's happened. Or you say to yourself, but I love that car. I've had that car for 7 years. You don't just get rid of something you've had for 7 years, you know. That's it. And you go, and you start, your friends say, are you nuts? You're going to put radials on that? And you say, hold it, Charlie. Don't say that about that. If I put $1,000 into that car, and I know that car, all right, what are you going to go out and spend $1,000 on that'll touch it? See, you got all the rhetoric. The rhetoric comes after. You make a basic decision. That's an intact system. Now, what about those people sitting in central Wisconsin Colony, sitting in classes for the severely and profoundly handicapped in the Milwaukee schools, sitting in St. Coletta's? As much as you love them, as much as you feel yourself to be a worthwhile, considerate, lovely human being, as long as that second card pops up, folks, and it's still popping up, as long as that second card pops up, they don't have a chance. Because inherently in what you do, they won't make it. Now, one of the things that I'm going to do during this conference, and I'm going to start out immediately after we take a break, is I'm going to destroy that second card. One of my goals here is for you to walk out genuinely believing, not rhetorically, not religiously, no, none of that, but walk out saying, you know, I have chalked him off. I have decided things about her that I have no business deciding, and I better go look a lot closer, because maybe she is an intact system, and I've got a lot of work to do on the malfunctioning subsystems, and when I do, look out. So one of my roles, and it's a funny role to be in, is for those of you that are happy, I have to stop that. I have to make you dissatisfied. I'd like to turn around and say, I hope I make you a lot happier by adding two things, or adding more to two things that some of you already have. One of them is very high expectancies for them. And number two is a means for achieving those expectancies. After the break, I'm going to try to put into perspective the relationships between the feelings that I've been talking about and the technology that I'm going to be talking about, and give you a feeling for what try another way means, and really then begin to zero in on what the conference is all about. I'll see you in 15 minutes.